"Help me." A homeless girl pulled a man from a lake, only to discover he owned the mansion across the water. And, "Don't come any closer." Eliza's voice trembled as the cold breeze licked at her cheeks, already damp with tears. She stood barefoot at the very edge of the lake, her worn coat flapping against her frail frame in the October wind. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and only the dim shimmer of streetlights from across the water gave any hint of illumination. Her breath came in uneven gasps, hands clenched at her sides, as if the physical pain in her chest could somehow match the ache in her soul. She had stood there for nearly 10 minutes, toes curled over the edge of the mossy rocks, the dark water below like a final invitation. Her body shivered, not just from the cold, but from the weight of the decision she was about to make. "I am so sorry," she whispered, barely audible, her voice cracking. "I tried. I really tried." She closed her eyes and tilted her face up to the wind. In her mind, images flashed: her little brother's laughter, her grandmother's wrinkled hands folding worn clothes, the pain in the doctor's eyes when he said the word late stage. Then, "Help me." A voice, barely a whisper, distant, raw. Eliza's eyes snapped open. She looked around, confused, thinking perhaps it was her imagination, until she heard it again, louder, urgent. "Help somebody, please!" She turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness over the lake. There, just past the reeds, the faint outline of a person thrashing in the freezing water. A man, drowning. For a moment, Eliza froze. Her mind raced. This was not supposed to happen. Not tonight. Not when she had already decided to let go. But something inside her snapped. Without thinking, she ran. The water was shockingly cold. The moment it touched her skin, it stole her breath away. Still, she dove in. Her arms fought the resistance of the waves as she swam toward him. He was flailing, eyes wide with terror, head going under and coming back up with violent coughs. She reached him just as he slipped beneath the surface. "Hold on!" she shouted, wrapping her arms around his chest and kicking furiously. He was heavy, nearly unconscious, and the pull of the lake was merciless. Her legs cramped, her lungs screamed for air. But inch by inch, she dragged him toward the shore. When they finally reached land, she collapsed beside him, soaked and shaking. She rolled him over, pressed against his chest, and started compressions. "Breathe!" she cried, her voice ragged. "Come on, breathe!" He choked suddenly, coughing up water, gasping for air. She helped him sit up, her hands supporting his back. For a long moment they sat there in silence, only the sound of water dripping from their clothes and the wind rustling the reeds around them. The man turned his head slightly, struggling to focus. "Why?" he croaked. "Why did you save me?" Eliza looked at him. Really looked. His eyes were bloodshot, skin pale, hair plastered to his forehead, and yet, beneath the exhaustion there was something else. Confusion. Vulnerability. Her answer came without hesitation. "I just wanted to do something that mattered," she said softly. "Something good before I go." His brow furrowed, breath catching. "Go where?" She glanced back at the lake. The answer hung in the air between them like a ghost. He blinked, as if the realization punched the breath from his lungs. "You were going to—" She nodded slowly. Not ashamed, not crying anymore. "I have cancer. There is nothing they can do. And I will not put my family through more pain. Not when we have nothing left to give." Silence stretched between them. Then finally, he whispered, "But you saved me." She met his gaze, eyes calm now, almost peaceful. "Because maybe that is the only thing I was meant to do." For the first time in his life, Dylan, who had always believed he had control, answers, purpose, felt entirely lost. And yet sitting there with this stranger, soaked to the bone and shivering in the darkness, he also felt something he had not felt in years. Alive. Two broken souls, clinging to the edge of the same abyss, had collided, and somehow, together, they were still here. The rain had begun to fall in a soft mist as Eliza guided Dylan through the narrow alleys behind the lake. He leaned on her slightly, still weak from nearly drowning, saying nothing of the soreness in his limbs or the burning in his throat. She glanced back at him now and then, hesitant, unsure if bringing him here was a mistake. They stopped in front of a crumbling shack with a roof patched by tarp and wood, walls weathered by time, and a threadbare curtain for a door. "Just for a bit," Eliza murmured, pushing it aside. Inside, dim lamplight cast flickering shadows across cracked walls. A metal basin caught steady drips from the ceiling. Smoke curled from a makeshift stove, where a frail, elderly woman stirred a pot with a bent spoon. A young boy lay curled on a thin mat, reading a tattered comic by flashlight. "Grandma," Eliza said gently. "He's a friend." The old woman rose with difficulty, wiping her hands on an apron. "Come in. It's cold." Dylan stepped inside and nodded. "Thank you." The boy looked at Eliza, then at Dylan, curious, cautious. She smiled faintly and gave a small shake of her head. "No danger." They gathered near the fire. The old woman poured hot water into chipped cups. "No tea," she said apologetically. "Just warmth." "It's perfect," Dylan replied. Silence settled around them. Eliza sat with her knees to her chest, eyes fixed on the flames. "How long have you lived here?" Dylan asked quietly. 4 years, Eliza answered. "After my father died, we were evicted. This was the only roof we could find." Dylan glanced around. Bare concrete, worn blankets, mosquito nets sagging from rusted nails. He turned to the boy. "Do you go to school?" "I want to, but I help Eliza collect cans. We sell them." Dylan looked at her. "You do all this?" "We do what we must," she said. "I worked in a noodle shop once. Too slow, they let me go." Her voice was flat, resigned. Dylan noticed how thin she was, how exhaustion clung to her face. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked gently. Eliza hugged her knees tighter. "Because no one hires a sick girl who can't read. Because when you're like me, poor, tired, people think it's your fault." She paused, then whispered, "I have ovarian cancer. Late stage. I stopped treatment months ago. It's too expensive. We barely afford rice. If I keep trying, I'll just take from them." She gestured toward her grandmother and brother. "They're all I have. I'd rather disappear quietly than see them suffer more." Dylan stared at the fire for a long moment, then turned to her, voice steady. "Eliza, do you think your death would make things easier for them? That your brother will grow strong, knowing his sister gave up? That your grandmother will find peace, watching you fade?" She said nothing. "You saved me," he said, a stranger, without hesitation. "But you can't save yourself." Her chin trembled. "You're not a burden," he whispered. "You are the reason they keep going. You're their hope." Tears welled in her eyes. One slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly. "I'm just tired," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "But sometimes being tired is where healing begins, if you let someone help you." Eliza looked at him, and for the first time in years, someone was truly seeing her, not with pity or judgment, but with belief, and that belief began to settle quietly inside her. The next morning arrived with a surprising stillness. The rain had stopped, and sunlight spilled gently through the cracks in the shack's weathered roof. Eliza stirred from sleep, her thin blanket barely warding off the morning chill. She stood up, rubbing her eyes, and stepped outside to fetch water from the communal tap. But something stopped her. A small package sat neatly by the door, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. A handwritten note was tucked beneath the string, "For a new day, from a friend of an angel." Inside were 2 cartons of milk, a loaf of soft bread, and a sealed container of warm soup. Eliza stood there for several seconds, her breath caught in her throat. She looked around, but the alley was empty. No footsteps, no voices. That afternoon, her grandmother returned from the market, wide-eyed and nearly speechless. "Child, you will not believe this. Someone bought every single thing in my basket before I could even set up my stand. Paid double." Eliza stared at her, stunned. "Who?" "I do not know. A man, tall, wore a cap low, said it was for his staff." Eliza's heart began to pound, a suspicion quietly blooming in the back of her mind. But she said nothing. The next day, another package arrived, and the next. Always food, always warm, always anonymous. By the end of the week, a social worker from a local charity knocked at their door. "We've been alerted about your living conditions," the woman said kindly. "There's a safe shelter available, private room, warm beds, hot showers. We'd like to offer you a temporary residence." Eliza frowned. "Who told you about us?" The woman smiled. "A donor who prefers to stay anonymous, but he insists you deserve better." Eliza was hesitant, suspicious. She had learned that good things often came with strings attached, but when she saw her brother's hopeful face, heard his small voice say, "Will it have a roof that does not leak?" she knew she had to try. They moved into the shelter the next day. It was modest but warm, clean, safe. For the first time in months, Eliza and her family slept without fear of rain or rats. That evening, as the sun dipped below the lake's edge, they went for a walk, following the soft lights along the new stone path by the water. As they passed a small food cart, a familiar voice called out, "Evening!" Eliza turned and saw Dylan, casually dressed, holding 3 steaming cobs of grilled corn. "Fancy seeing you here," he said with a grin. She blinked. "You?" He held out the food. "I thought this might make a perfect dinner, unless you are too fancy for street corn now." Her lips curved before she could stop herself. "Never." They sat on a bench beneath a flickering lamppost, steam rising from the food in their hands. Dylan handed her a cup of hot tea and smiled as she inhaled deeply. "It smells like home," she whispered. Her grandmother and brother chatted nearby, laughing with a vendor. Eliza turned to Dylan. "Why are you doing all this?" "I like corn," he replied. She rolled her eyes. "Seriously?" He looked at her for a moment, then said more softly, "Because I owe you my life. Because I see something in you that maybe you have not seen in yourself for a long time." She looked away, cheeks flushing. After they ate, Dylan suggested a walk around the lake. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant pine. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching softly over fallen leaves. Eliza spoke first. "When I was little, my father used to bring me here. We would sit under that big oak and pretend the lake was the sea and he was a fisherman with magical nets." "What happened to him?" Dylan asked gently. "He died, trying to give us a better life. He was stronger than me. He never gave up. You are strong too, Eliza." She shook her head. "I am tired, not strong. Even tired people can be brave," he said. "You jumped into a freezing lake for someone you did not know." She paused, absorbing that. They reached the edge of a small pier. Moonlight shimmered on the surface of the water. Dylan stood beside her, close enough for their shoulders to brush. A gentle breeze passed between them. Without thinking, their hands brushed, skin against skin. They both froze. Eliza looked at him, startled. He was already looking at her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then both pulled back, flustered, murmuring apologies. But something had shifted. In the quiet that followed, in the soft sound of waves lapping against the dock, something unspoken hung between them. A promise. A beginning neither had expected. Eliza had never enjoyed going to the market. The bustling noise, the hurried footsteps, the sharp elbows and colder stares, it all made her feel invisible at best, unworthy at worst. But with Dylan beside her, everything felt just a little different. They walked together down the narrow path lined with stalls, where vendors called out prices and bargained with locals. Dylan carried a woven basket, insisting on helping, though Eliza told him she had done this alone 100 times. "You should let me carry something," he said with a teasing smile. "After all, I owe you my life." "You paid me with soup and street corn," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "We are even." But when they reached her grandmother's usual vendor, an impatient customer shoved past them, nearly knocking over the little stand. The woman glared at Eliza's grandmother and muttered, "You people in your charity stalls, just get out of the way." Eliza stepped forward, fists clenched, but before she could speak, Dylan was there. "I believe she was here first," he said calmly, but with an unmistakable firmness. "And if you cannot wait like a decent human being, perhaps the market is not for you." The woman sputtered and walked away without a word. Eliza stared at him. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Dylan replied simply. That evening the clouds rolled in again. A soft drizzle fell over the quiet streets as Dylan and Eliza walked beneath a shared umbrella. They stopped at a small corner stall that sold instant noodles in foam cups, hot, salty, and strangely comforting. They sat under an awning with 2 steaming cups between them, steam curling into the cool air. Raindrops tapped gently on the plastic roof above. Dylan shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. She froze. "You will get soaked," she protested. "I will dry," he said, his voice low. "You need it more." Something about the simplicity of it, no hesitation, no expectations, made something in her crack. She looked at him, really looked. He was soaked, rain dripping down his hair and onto his lashes, and yet he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. And suddenly she laughed. A real, unguarded, unfiltered laugh. Dylan turned to her, surprised. "What? I just forgot how that felt," she said between giggles. "What? Rain?" "No." She looked at him, her laughter fading into a soft smile. To laugh, to feel not invisible. His eyes lingered on her, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then Eliza whispered, almost afraid of her own voice, "I have never had anyone be this kind to me." Dylan did not speak. He just looked at her, eyes shining with something unspoken, something far deeper than gratitude or affection, something approaching reverence. The next day, Dylan casually invited her and her family to visit the garden of a home he said belonged to a friend of his, never mentioning it was in fact his. "I think you will like it," he told her. "It is quiet, beautiful, peaceful." Eliza hesitated. "I do not belong in places like that." "You saved someone's life," Dylan replied. "You belong wherever you want to be." She relented. When they arrived, the large iron gates opened slowly. Beyond them, manicured lawns stretched out, and a path of cobblestone led to a modest yet elegant white mansion surrounded by maple trees, their leaves turning gold and crimson in the fall air. "I just want to show you the garden," Dylan said, sensing her hesitation. As they wandered through the rows of flowers and tall hedges, her little brother ran ahead, laughing, and her grandmother marveled at the variety of plants. Eliza watched them in disbelief, so unused to seeing them so free, so light. "You arranged this, didn't you?" she asked Dylan softly. He gave a nonchalant shrug. "I made a few calls." She smiled, touched. Later, they sat on a wooden bench under a trellis wrapped in climbing roses. Dylan pulled out a small notebook and a pencil. "I want to show you something," he said. "Will you trust me?" Eliza nodded. He opened the book and wrote in large, clear letters, E-L-I-Z-A, he. He pointed to each letter. "That is your name, and we are going to learn how to read it." She blinked. "But I never can. We will go slow." Letter by letter, sound by sound, he guided her through it, and when she read it aloud, halting but whole, he flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "Everyone deserves a second chance at hope." Eliza stared at the words. Her lips parted, her eyes glistened, and then she cried, not from sorrow, but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen. Truly, deeply seen. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the high-arched windows of the library. Dust danced in golden shafts of light, settling gently over shelves lined with books of every age and subject. Eliza moved slowly, her fingers grazing the spines as she wiped down the surfaces, still awed by how quiet the place felt, like a cathedral made of memory and silence. Dylan had asked if she might want to help reorganize the old library. "You love stories," he had said. "Let's create a place where they live again." She had smiled then, touched by his thoughtfulness, unaware of the shadow that lay waiting in the shelves. As she carefully dusted a row of framed photographs on the wall, one particular frame caught her eye. The photo was in black and white, slightly tilted. It showed a group of staff members standing proudly in the garden of the estate, groundskeepers, cooks, cleaners, and in the back, almost hidden, stood a man with a gentle smile and a hand resting protectively on a small girl's shoulder. Eliza stared. Her breath hitched. She stepped closer, heart pounding. It was him, her father. He looked younger, stronger, but she would never mistake those eyes or that quiet pride in his posture. And the little girl beside him, blonde hair, barefoot, laughing, it was her. The floor beneath her seemed to shift. "No," she whispered. No. The photo was labeled, "Staff of Rosewood Estate, 11 years ago." Suddenly, everything came crashing back. The rumors. The night her father came home pale, holding a small crumpled paper in his hands. The accusation of theft, the disgrace, the job lost. And then the years that followed, one harder than the next. Him trying to find work again, doors closing in his face, sleepless nights hauling crates at the docks, the accident, the blood, the goodbye that came too soon. Her fingers trembled as she set the frame down. Her eyes burned. The man she had saved, the man who had walked with her around the lake, who had shared noodles with her under a rain-soaked awning, who had gently guided her hand as she traced her name. He lived in the house that destroyed her father. She turned and left. No word, no note, no glance behind her. She ran through the garden, her footsteps loud against the stone path. Her lungs ached, but she did not stop until the gates of the estate were behind her and the trees swallowed her whole. That night, under a moonless sky, she sat on the same dock where she had once pulled Dylan from the water. The air was cold, biting, but she did not move. The pain was a storm inside her, howling with betrayal, confusion, and a sorrow that felt newly born even though it had been with her all her life. Her voice cracked in the darkness, low and bitter. "I saved the wrong man." And then louder, stronger, breaking, "I saved the wrong man." The lake did not answer. The wind did not care. She buried her face in her knees, rocking back and forth. The image of her father's smile burned behind her eyelids. That place, his last honest job, the place that spat him out without mercy, had belonged to Dylan all along. Had he known? Was this pity? Was she just part of some twisted redemption story he had created for himself? Eliza sobbed until her chest ached and her body trembled with exhaustion. She thought of leaving again, disappearing, letting the silence reclaim her like it had almost done that night she stood at the edge of the water. But this time, something held her back. Not hope, not love, anger. She needed answers, not silence, not running. But tonight all she had was the cold and her tears, and a heart breaking all over again. Dylan had not slept in days. Ever since Eliza had run from the estate, something inside him had cracked open. Her absence echoed in every hallway, every quiet corner where her laughter used to live, the bench under the rose trellis, the garden path they had walked side by side, the library where she first traced her name. Without her, all of it felt hollow. And the photo. He had gone back to it that same night, stared long and hard at the man in the back row, the little girl holding his hand. He had known the story vaguely, something his father once muttered about a theft, a betrayal, and a necessary dismissal. He had never asked questions. But now, he needed answers, and he would find them. Days later, Dylan stood in the dusty archive room in the back of the estate, leafing through old staff records and disciplinary files. Hours passed. Cobwebs clung to his sleeves. His eyes burned from the tiny print, but finally he found it. A file marked Harold James, Incident Report, 11 years ago. Inside were statements, one from a manager named Randall Price, claiming to have witnessed Harold stealing a valuable brooch. The item had gone missing during a private party hosted by Dylan's father. The report was signed, sealed, but something did not sit right. Dylan dug deeper. He found old expense logs. Randall Price had large, unexplained cash deposits around that time. There were complaints from other staff members buried in side memos, allegations of intimidation, favoritism, missing supplies. Most had been dismissed by Dylan's father, who trusted Price implicitly. Finally, at the bottom of one envelope was a note, an unsigned statement from a former maid who had seen Price with the missing brooch the night before the event. It had never been followed up. Dylan's chest tightened. He felt sick. He knew what he had to do. That evening, he walked through the familiar alleyways with a file tucked beneath his coat. His steps led him to the small, broken building that used to be Eliza's shelter. the place he had first followed her to, the night she saved his life. He knocked softly. Eliza's little brother opened the door, wide-eyed. "It's him." Eliza stood behind him, tired, cautious. Her grandmother appeared beside her, clutching a scarf around her thin shoulders. Dylan took a breath, then dropped to one knee. He opened the file and held it up with both hands. "I found the truth," he said, voice steady despite the pounding in his heart. "Randall Price, my father's trusted manager, stole that brooch. He framed your father. My father believed the wrong man." Eliza's breath caught. Dylan looked up, pain in his eyes. "I cannot undo what happened. I cannot bring your father back. But I can give you this, his name, his honor, the truth." He turned to her grandmother. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. On behalf of my family, I am sorry." The old woman stared at him for a moment, lips trembling. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and began to cry. Not the kind of cry that comes from anger, but from relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving my son back." Dylan held her gently, his own eyes stinging. Eliza watched in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She stepped forward, barely able to speak. "My father was finally cleared," she whispered, her voice cracked. Dylan rose slowly, face to face with her now. "I should have told you everything sooner," he said. "But I was afraid of losing the one person who made me want to be better." Eliza looked at him, her expression torn between sorrow and something deeper, something beginning to mend. She took the file from his hands, holding it to her chest. "I grew up hating this house," she said softly. "But today you made it a place where the truth lives." And for the first time since that terrible night, she took a step toward him instead of away. They stood once again beneath the trellis in the garden, just like that first afternoon when Dylan had shown her the roses and taught her to spell her name. But this time, the air felt different. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to her. Eliza opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a deed, a legal document. Her eyes widened. "Rosewood Estate? I own it," Dylan said gently. "I have since my father passed 2 years ago." She stared at him, stunned. "All this time, you were—" He nodded. "I wanted you to see me as I was. Not as a name, not as a house. Just the man you pulled from the lake." Silence stretched between them. Her heart pounded, caught between anger, confusion, and something softer she could not yet name. Dylan stepped closer. "Eliza, I am not the estate. I am not the legacy of my father's mistakes. I am the man who was drowning, and you saved me. And now, all I want is to help you live." Her eyes filled with tears. She had spent so long believing she was invisible, insignificant. Yet here he was, offering her not pity, but a hand to hold through the storm. She nodded. "I will try," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for them, and for you." The first day of chemotherapy was cold and gray. Eliza sat in a recliner chair, a thin blanket over her knees. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to everything. But beside her sat Dylan, holding a small speaker playing soft piano music. On the tray table was a warm croissant and a paperback book she had started to read, slowly, painfully, but with determination. "Page 10 today?" he asked with a smile. She nodded, leaning into his shoulder. Each session followed the same rhythm. Dylan never missed a single appointment. Some days he brought coloring books, other days a jar of wildflowers from the garden. Once he even brought her a tiny music box that played a lullaby she remembered from childhood. And Eliza, against all odds, began to feel stronger. The side effects came, of course, nausea, fatigue, but her spirits held firm. Hope had taken root. One afternoon after her 3rd week of treatment, Dylan appeared with a paper bag. "Close your eyes," he said. She frowned. "What are you up to?" "Just trust me." When she opened her eyes, he was holding out a dress, simple, cream-colored cotton with delicate stitching along the hem. "I saw it in a shop window," he said, almost shyly. "I thought, maybe it would make you feel as beautiful as I see you." Her hand went to her mouth. No one had ever given her something so thoughtful. Later that evening she tried it on in the shelter's mirror. It fit perfectly. She stared at her reflection, her thin frame, her pale skin, the short fuzz where her hair used to be. But for the first time, she did not see sickness. She saw survival. That night, as they sat again beneath the trellis, she turned to Dylan, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to think I was going to die." He looked at her, eyes steady. "But now," she said, the smallest smile tugging at her lips, "I think I can live." Dylan reached for her hand and held it tight. "Then let us live," he said. Together. A year passed. The seasons turned gently, as if the world itself had decided to move more tenderly around Eliza. Spring arrived with soft winds and blossoms that lined the town's narrow streets. Eliza stood at the library desk in a modest skirt and blouse, her hair now short and soft with new growth, her eyes bright with energy that hadn't lived there before. She had taken a job as an assistant at the town library. Small tasks at first, shelving books, managing returns, but soon she began something more meaningful, leading reading classes for elderly townspeople who had grown up without ever learning the alphabet. She would smile patiently, guiding their fingers across the page, repeating sounds gently, encouraging each syllable like it was sacred, just as Dylan had done for her. Some days, she would catch her reflection in the library window, and for a fleeting second, not recognize herself. Not the girl who had stood at the edge of the lake, but the woman who had chosen to step back from it and build a life. Dylan had kept his promise too. The Rosewood estate had undergone a transformation, not into a private fortress, but into a place of refuge. He opened the doors to a new mission, a residential center for homeless families and terminally ill patients who had no one else. He named it Echoes of Eliza. "I wanted it to remind the world," he said at the opening ceremony, "that one act of courage can echo for generations." People cried, donors stepped forward, volunteers signed up. The town, once too busy to see a girl in rags, now listened, learned, changed. Eliza stood beside Dylan that day, her hand in his, eyes glistening with quiet pride. On the anniversary of the night they met, Dylan proposed. It was simple. Just the two of them, beneath the rose trellis, the same place where she had read her name for the first time. She said yes, with tears in her eyes and laughter in her voice, and on a warm summer afternoon, by the same lake where their story began, they were married. Only close friends and family were invited. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, and the surface of the water shimmered with gold. Eliza wore the cream-colored dress Dylan had once given her. Her little brother, now taller and proud, stood beside her, beaming. Their grandmother wiped her eyes with the handkerchief and whispered, "Finally, my granddaughter has a family." As the couple stood hand in hand, exchanging simple vows beneath an arch of white lilies, Eliza's brother stepped forward for a short speech. "My sister saved a man's life," he said, voice shaking but clear. "But that man didn't just survive. He gave us a home. He gave my sister her smile back. He gave me a future." He looked at them both. She saved him, but he saved our family. There was not a dry eye in the crowd. As the sun began to set, Eliza and Dylan walked to the edge of the lake, the quiet lapping of water marking time like a soft lullaby. They sat together on the old dock, worn smooth from weather and memory. Her head rested on his shoulder, his hand warm in hers. The light played on the surface of the lake, just like it had that night, when darkness nearly swallowed them both. Only this time, it glowed. She turned to him, smiling through tears that had nothing to do with sorrow. "We both died a little inside," she whispered, "but we chose to live for each other." Dylan kissed the top of her head, and as the last light dipped below the horizon, the lake reflected not pain, not loss, but the quiet brilliance of two souls who had found their way home. Sometimes, life brings two broken souls together not by chance, but by purpose. Eliza saved a stranger from drowning, but in truth they saved each other. Through pain, healing, and love, they discovered that even the most shattered hearts can find their way back to light. And perhaps that is the quiet magic of kindness, of second chances, of love that asks for nothing yet gives everything. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Soul Stirring Stories, where every week we bring you tales that heal, inspire, and remind us all of the beauty of the human spirit. Click subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and never miss a story that might just change your day or your life. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, love is always worth the fight.